Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming, where two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything
Or
decide
drive
to talk
cars.
about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And we're not talking about World of Darkness, because this is a show where we're going to talk about Conquest, Last Argument of Kings, which is certainly what we were talking about before the cut. We have recently been diving into the various factions within Conquest to share our knowledge and experience with folks out there, in case someone is maybe considering if the faction is for them, or maybe if they just want to learn a little bit about it, to know what they're going to go up against in their local league or games or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And we've run our way through, I believe, 4 other factions by the time this releases, or maybe this is the 4th. So we've done a couple of these, but all of them are going to follow a similar structure, where we are going to talk about, the faction at its core. We are not here to talk about what the most efficient or strongest units or best builds or armies or tournament stuff. We're just not those dudes. You could certainly get better stuff for that elsewhere from more knowledgeable folks. Instead, we're going to try to give you a quick pitch on how this faction works in-game, generally speaking.
Okay.
You really picked up on that one, John.
Okay, so, first off, 100 Kingdoms.
God, it's like you were in a car accident or something.
First off, 100 Kingdoms, who are they, right? 100 Kingdoms are a faction that is just entirely made out of dudes, right?
Regular humans. There's not a monster among them. In fact, it's part of the faction identity,
Yes.
at least. As of now, there's no monster anywhere in 100K.
And like with all of these factions, we're just going to start at the very beginning, and we're going to talk about their faction rules, their core rules. In 100 Kingdoms, it's a little bit weirder. They don't have like a core identity rule that they sort of build around, because the core identity of them is the individual units that you're picking, right?
Yeah, I think with like Old Dominion Animate Vessel, for example, a great example of a rule that defines an army. Or for Wadroon, the Chance.
Yes.
It's a rule that defines the entire army. It's just not the case here.
Yeah, so in here, you're going to pick the first thing that you're going to make the choice for is something called adaptability to adversity, in which you will pick either veterans or relentless drill, and this goes across your entire army. If you pick veterans, all of your officers are going to cost double, but they're going to allow you to give +1 clash or +1 volley when you purchase an officer for a unit. But note here that that doesn't include order units, things like Ashen Dawn, things like Crimson Tower, things like the Seal Temple, because they don't get officers. So this is really just for like men-at-arms, Household Guard, Gilded Legion, Steel Legion, Household Knights, like those things. Mounted Squires, things like that are going to benefit from this. Then the other one is Relentless Drill. Relentless Drill gives all infantry regiments support 2. If they already have support, they get +1 support. This is really good if you want to bring big blocks of dudes. If you want to bring a bunch of Gilded Legion, if you want to bring a bunch of Household Guard, if you want to bring a bunch of Steel Legion, or yada, yada, yada. If you want to bring a bunch of melee dudes, it allows you to bring big bricks of them and get a bunch of extra attacks from support. Which is just really...
I have seen this with Household Guard, and it was pretty good, I gotta say.
It's very interesting. Like, it's very neat. Also, like, as a note on the table, it looks really cool to see a bunch of dudes with spears, like, in formation. It fits the narrative really well. Very good. And then their other special rule is they get to pick 2 warlords instead of 1, and so they get 2 supremacy abilities instead of 1, which is where a lot of customization comes from for a 100 Kingdoms list, where you can pick 2 very different sort of supremacies to build around instead of being forced into 1, allowing you to build a list full of diversity and sort of different things it's doing instead of just one sort of tactic.
I'd say it's a huge benefit for this army, both in terms of like mechanical play, of course, but also just in terms of flavor and fun, if you want to play it yourself as like your army.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes in Conquest, we've talked about it before, for some other armies, you might just pick your warlord and it determines basically your whole list. Some warlords really, really, really pigeonhole your list choices because of their supremacy ability, either because they only buff certain things, or they only allow you to do a certain strategy, and everything else flows from that. Here, not ever gonna be the case. You get so much more flex because at least if absolute worst, you're going to get two directions to run into with two separate supremacy abilities.
Yeah,
And if you get a little mad scientist-y, you can use them to support each other in weird, interesting ways.
yeah, it's also very useful to be able to go like, oh, okay, well, this is the one that I always take, right? I always like this one because it allows me to do this thing that I really like doing. But I also want to try out bringing this other one because it is a fun little piece of tech to try. Like an example that I'll say that we're not going to talk about in the supremacy abilities is like Chapter Mage. You might want to try the Chapter Mage Supremacy every once in a while because it's really good anti-magic tech, but it's not necessarily a thing that you're going to want to immediately go out the gate if you had only had one supremacy ability to pick from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
It changes the weight of what you think is worth trying.
yes, which is a boon for this army and very unique to this army. It's very, very interesting. But speaking of supremacy abilities, we are going to move on to the two picks we are going to talk about for it, like we have for every faction. First one,
Just things that we think are kind of emblematic of the Force as a whole.
yes, or sort of like the standout pick, and sort of explain why, right? The first one, and it's for the non-order dudes. It is just for like normal rank and file guys. And that is Imperial Officer.
I've seen this a lot.
And why is he good? Well, good because every turn you can give two infantry regiments coming onto the table, Vanguard.
Whew, extra move. Pretty good.
Even when he's not on the table. So, turn 1. Say you have 2 units of mercenary crossbowmen. They both get Vanguard. First turn. Awesome. Say you, turn 2, have 2 units of men-at-arms. They also get Vanguard. Say turn 3, you manage to get 2 units of Steel Legion on the table. They both get Vanguard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's very good.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, we've talked about it in Nords. This might look a little familiar as a rule. This is basically what Shaman does in Nords, and it's very compelling there.
Mm-hmm.
It's very compelling here. It's no different. Being able to pick units that are coming on and get them up the board faster than your opponent likely can is just always going to be really helpful for you trying to push objectives or block objectives and execute your game plan. And you can use it both aggressively and defensively. It's a really cool rule. And it pushes the sort of tactician theme that runs through 100 Kingdoms that I think is pretty well realized in a lot of ways. That these are things that you are going to get and be able to leverage as part of an overarching strategy, but isn't itself the strategy as a whole, which is pretty nice.
It's like each individual piece, pieces together to a greater whole. That's really what this does. And Vanguard in this army is very useful because you're sort of immobile outside of your cavalry. Like your big blocks of dudes are hard to maneuver around. So sort of where they end up deploying and marching up the table is sort of where they're going to end up being. So
yeah, for most of the game. Once you get bogged down in a fight, especially, I mean, you're locked there now.
Yeah.
And this just lets you make sure you get that engagement where you need it to be.
Mm-hmm. And then the second option we're going to pick is not just because of their supremacy ability, which is pretty good and useful, but it's also because of the options they can pick from in their warband. So the next one we're going to talk about is the Priory Commander for the Sealed Temple.
Seen this a lot.
First off, I know that in the app it doesn't have like a colored in picture. It doesn't have like an actual photo picture. And it's because it's one of the only kits for heroes that is actually dual kit. So if you have a Priory Commander for Crimson Tower, it can also be a Priory Commander for Steel Temple. You just replace the lance with a sword. And I think the heads swap. And it's great. So what this allows you to do is to bring Sealed Temple as mainstay, which are fluid reform, not very tough, but pretty tough cavalry that are mediums that can come up to the table really quickly and generally pretty useful. But what this supremacy ability does, it allows you to take everything that ends up in his warband, which are all orders units. So things like Ashen Dawn, things like Crimson Tower, things like Sealed Temple. In the future, things like Order of the Sword, Order of St. Lazarus. And it allows to give them blessed, right? Once per game. And I don't know how to tell you this, but blessed is very good.
Whew, it is so good.
Blessed is pretty good. It's pretty good. Being able to choose to reroll all of your attack dice or all of your defense dice is just really good. You can pick one or the other, but that's all you need, right? It's an extremely good rule, especially being able to give this to his entire warband once per battle. Just like turn it on, all of the units get this thing this turn. It's really good.
And again, much like the Imperial officers, you could use that aggressively, reroll your hits on attacks if you know you got to push. Or defensively, if you realize someone's going to get the drop on you, you need some defense. Great. Reroll defense saves. That could get you out of some binds rather often. And even save you from some of your own misplays when you're still learning the faction. It's really good.
And that alone would be good if that was it. But it's not. Because it also gives a little thing that if you already have Blessed, which Ash and Dawn, the sort of big, powerful unit in that warband, already have Blessed. So they, instead of just getting Blessed twice or something, they instead get either Hardened 1 or +1 attack. Hardened 1 will reduce something's cleave. It's just very, very handy in that regard. And +1 attack is just more damage. Like, that's very good. More damage, more better.
Mm-hmm. And again, it just adds to the flexibility. You get the attack, you get the defense bonus. What do you need? It's just compelling. And it's one that, these are two that I've seen really, really often. Particularly Priory Commander recently because of Ash and Dawn. We'll talk about them that have caused him to pop up more often. But even with that unit, even assuming that unit gets tuned down some, I still think the Priory Commander has gas and is compelling in his own right.
Mm-hmm.
But if those are sort of the emblematic warlords, and there are some others that we think are cool, like the mage or the theist priest, all because they sort of play into this tactician strategy. You know, what does the army do on the table? What do we mean by that? Because I do think that is the thing most people want to know, and oftentimes walk away from videos not actually getting an answer to in a straightforward way. So, generally speaking, very straightforward. This army fights how you imagine an army fights in your head. If you're into historicals, you're into the idea of, the War of the Roses and the Battle of Agincourt and all of those really emblematic historical fights and how you think those looked. This plays like that. It's very honest. It's very straightforward. This is basic guys in ranks and flanks with spears or swords fighting against other people, trying to hold the middle line, hold objectives that matter, with archers supporting them from the flank or over the top, depending on their type of weapon, and then largely having most of the heavy lifting done by cavalry coming in from the flanks. It's very straightforward, and that's a benefit here. The amount of historical vibe while also still being just a little fantastical with things like the orders, I think is undersold and not lauded often enough. Mm-hmm. It is very easy to make an army in a game that is very historically accurate, but also boring as hell. Like, let's just be honest. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to do. Like, you don't have the spice, you don't have anything that makes it get a little zhuzh of fun. And here, that's not at all the case. The horses are big, they feel impactful. It's feels almost realistic to how a big cavalry charge with something like a Clydesdale-sized horse full of armor would feel like. Yeah. And if you've never seen a horse up close, you should take a look and then see how much you still complain about the Ash and Dawn impact stats.
It's one of the things.
Painful.
It's one of the things about Conquest that I like playing against 100 Kingdoms early on when I started the game. I really learned first on, and that is like, and I loved immediately, and that was cavalry felt like cavalry should. Like, it very impactful, and it was very good on the charge. Like, as they should. They're horses, like they're cavalry. It does a thing. But something that's really charming about this army and that they do really well in the context of Conquest is that as we keep getting more and more sort of like fantastical elements, I mean, we just got genie wizards with like fire elemental dudes, and they're fighting undead Roman legions and just like ice giants from the north, and like eldritch abominations from the spire towers, and orcs riding
Don't forget-
dinosaurs.
The magic driders coming from the forest soon.
Yes, and like all of this crazy stuff, and they're still dudes that are doing this. And that is an interesting concept in every world that has it. And it's the same way here. And it's great. And the idea that goes even beyond that is that even among some of these normal men, there are these huge paragons of humanity in the Ashen Dawn, in the Sealed Temple, in the Crimson Tower, that can just ride out to face these terrors, these massive creatures, on their own.
That are definitely regular humans.
Definitely
just regular dudes.
Just totally yoked, normal 6'5" dudes.
Like, they're bench pressing Toyota Tacomas, but it's fine. They're just dudes. Work harder. They're just guys.
Pull yourself
You
up
can
by
do it
your
too.
saddlebags or whatever. Like, it's an interesting concept. And if you're a person who really likes these games, you like just playing like the everyman, right? This is perfectly up your alley. And on top of that, like, I really think that this is just a really good fundamentals army. Like, you're going to learn the fundamentals of every part of this game from this army, and you could play against everything and sort of learn everything. This is a great first person's army. We'll talk about that more later. But like, if I were to teach somebody, like, I have 100 Kingdoms, right? Wadroon's my primary faction. I'm building a 100 Kingdoms army, so I want to go teach people. I can just put this army in their hands and go, play. Because everything does what it says on the tin.
Your guys with shields and swords, they're going to hold a line better than your dudes with bows. Okay, you're going to figure that out very quickly. Your spear guys, they're good in a group. They want to poke people. Okay, very cool. Your horses are fast. They hit hard. Great, very cool.
Yeah.
Everything makes sense. Everything does its job, and you're going to get a little bit of everything. You're going to learn how melee works. You're going to learn how shooting works. You're going to learn how magic works. You're going to learn how prayers work. You're even going to learn how some movement tricks happen with your cavalry. There's very little that you're going to miss out on in this army, and I think that is great if you are someone who wants to go deep on a game.
Yeah, and now we get to the fun part of the episode, where y'all can get mad at us because what we decided that we're going to rate these things arbitrarily, and we're going to go on to ratings.
Oh, yes, the ratings portion. The spot that everyone will definitely agree with us on.
Yes. So, first off, flavor to gameplay rating, right? Like, this is how we love to rate stuff based off of how they are pitched, what the models look like, what the lore has, sort of like what you see on the box and how does it translate to the game itself. And this faction gets a pretty good rating. It gets a rating of an A, because everything does what it says it's going to do. The dudes with swords and shields are a little bit tougher than the dudes without swords and shields and armor. The guys with spears fight like dudes with spears. The cavalry fights like cavalry. The things that are called the like paladins of the Order of the Ashen Dawn, they just wreck face. They're great at everything. They do exactly what you think they're going to do. Like, the bows, shoot. The crossbows, shoot. Like, the mage shoots fireballs, has like spells to pick from. Like, the officer gives orders.
Yeah, it works in a beautiful harmony, and it's hard to knock it for that. Exactly what you imagine when you read the lore and you look at the minis is how it feels on the table. The only thing that stops it from being an S is there are a couple of fantastical units on the way, like the, the Order of the Sword and Order of St. Lazarus that aren't out yet. I think if those lean just a little more Paladin-y to really just push that upper limit of fantasy a little higher, that will be the cherry on top that for me would push this to like an S.
Yeah,
but it is super solid.
Yeah, depending on how cool the Order of the Sword are, I might end up playing 100 Kingdoms for a long, like putting the Wadroon aside for a bit to play more 100 Kingdoms, because the Order of the Sword look awesome. Dudes in plate mail with cloaks and swords is what the concept art look like. Look great.
I'm into it. It's great. I have no notes. Great job. Parabellum. If you nail those last few minis, I will make this an S. No complaint.
Yes, 100%. I think this is actually probably one of the best factions in the game for flavor to gameplay rating, if not the best. Like it is, it goes so far. I would actually suggest some people who are interested in other games that have similar, like, styled armies in there would look at this game and this army instead to see if this would be better for them because of how well it sells its concept, specifically with the cavalry. Like, if you've ever wanted to play a war game in which you love cavalry and you want cavalry to do the exact thing you imagine cavalry can do, this game, this faction.
Yeah. Next is the thing we like to grade it on is specifically because of how many new players seem to find our stuff to get information, and that is how new player friendly a faction is. As you can imagine, if you've watched our other videos, not all armies are necessarily easy for new players to pick up and play for one reason or another. Maybe the units themselves are inherently difficult, or maybe the mechanics as a baseline are really hard to get your head around, or maybe they'll teach you bad habits. There's a lot of things that can make it hard. Those things here, not a concern. Much like flavor to gameplay, I think 100 Kingdoms smashes it in this setting.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of being a new player, as we mentioned before, everything just works how you imagine it to. And when that is the case, it's easier for people to make good decisions. You know, you understand at baseline, okay, I should put these guys with the shields in front. Because it's very easy to read in art design what they're intended to do. I should send horses on the flanks, smash into people from the side. Great, you understand the basics. And all of that makes it easier for a brand new player who's maybe never played a war game before to pick this army up and start to do pretty well with it and make better decisions and learn over time. They don't have the hurdles to jump over that you might from some other factions where you have to stretch your brain or learn complicated sequencing. It all just works. And I love that about 100 Kingdoms.
This is a great faction if you are into the concept of this game, but are unsure if the mechanics are going to be too much for you. This is a wonderful place to start. It'll allow you to sort of slowly learn all the mechanics of the game while also playing, because you don't have to deal with the overly complex rules of some of the other factions, right? Like, Wajroon is a difficult pitch to a new player because of just the fact that it's like the chants are difficult and like you're kind of not really glass cannon, but you're sort of like a dance, right? This is not. This is have you played a Total War game? Have you played a strategy game in general? Have you watched a bunch of like History Channel and know like war documentaries? Like you can figure this out. You can play this and it won't feel like things will make sense when you do things wrong, right? When the side of your men-at-arms gets smashed by their cavalry, you'd be like, oh, I left their flanks exposed.
That's on me.
Easy.
I will not do that next time.
Yeah, right? Like, the mistakes are easy to learn from. The combos are easy to see. The fundamentals are easy to go. But I don't think that it means that they're a bad faction. I think that they can scale upwards more, and there's plenty to learn from. It's like the epitome of easy to learn, hard to master faction.
And I think that does take us to our final rating, which for us is like, we want to talk about how easy it is for new players, but then also, how is it if you want to go deep on the faction? You know, if you want to play it for a long time, you want to put the reps in, you want to get 15, 20, 30, 40, 100 games in.
Yeah, you want to start taking it to tournaments, you want to start trying to maybe go to Adepticon, maybe you want to like go to like an LVO, or you want to like try to be the number one owner of the opposite of the wooden spoon, whatever it is.
A golden fork? I don't know.
Yeah.
If we don't have that, we should make that. But if you want to go hard on this faction, how is it? Because sometimes, not exactly great. We've talked about on some of the others. And here, I do think there is something to be said that it is easy for new players to get into, which does take some of the sort of height off of the long-term mastery. But even then, I do agree with John. I don't think the long-term mastery is necessarily super stunted by any means. The basics are easy to see, but I think there is a lot of nuance and how you position and how you combo and how you list build and what supremacy abilities you combine and what sort of units you're trying to take and how you want to push a board and what macro grand strategy you're trying to execute. That you're really only going to get from an experienced player playing 100 Kingdoms versus a new player. I do think there's quite a bit of differentiation there, which normally would put them at a solid B. But currently there's a fairly large issue and an anchor that makes it to where I can't rightly feel like a B is appropriate. Because currently there's a unit in the faction, we've talked about them during the episode, Ash and Dawn. Big, really cool horse guys. I actually really like the unit in theory and in the fluff, and the minis are incredible. However, they've got some rules that are really, really compelling. Real powerful. And it is not just powerful in a way that like, oh, I should take a unit to kind of help my strategy happen. They have, in a lot of ways, overtaken 100 Kingdoms list to become the core around which every list I have seen for the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 months has been revolving around. It's just a lot of the army list building has become buy Ash and Dawn, apply Ash and Dawn. Everything else is just there to be cheap, while Ash and Dawn. And I don't think that's doing a lot of service to the long-term mastery ceiling of the faction.
Yeah, and it's sort of the only mar on the faction, because there are other builds that don't just utilize Ash and Dawn. I've seen armies built that just don't use any Ash and Dawn, that will just instead use big bricks with like a Noble Lord and some other things. But like how you get to playing that, the disparity between playing that and doing well with that as opposed to just taking Ash and Dawn in most smaller communities or smaller groups is just going to be easier to just get the Ash and Dawn, to do the Ash and Dawn, right?
Buy 2 units, reinforce them, off you go.
Instead, you just like regardless of how they decide to maybe address this in the future, because it'll probably end up getting addressed, Ash and Dawn should still be really good, but maybe there should be some like incentive to try out other builds for 100 Kingdoms. But like, it's really hard to say that it's like the whole faction's bad, because we just got done talking about how great the rest of the faction was. Like, truly,
Exactly.
This is a wonderful faction if you're newer to the game, or if you want one faction to play. This is a great faction to do that with. There's a ton of options. The bench is huge for this faction, right? The warlords are huge. There's so many that you can pick from. Like, you don't just have to pick one build in this army. You can build a ton of different ways. And if you are not somebody who is just building towards power and you instead want to build towards like a narrative, this is a great faction to have, because you can be like, okay, well, this is this small defense force for this village or this like town, and they're getting assaulted by my friends like spires or something. And you can build a narrative force around it, and maybe you don't have access to order units because it's just normal dudes. How do you deal with that? How do you play that, right? This opens up that sort of level of build and ability that some of the other armies don't have. And that's only growing as it looks like they're getting more units in the future. Like just the Scutari, the Order of the Sword, the Order of St. Lazarus. Like, these are all additions to the army that will only make this a deeper fact and a deeper bench, that as the game grows, this faction will be able to sort of shift into and out of in different ways than it needs to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the fact that there are so many other options in the wing is why even Ash and Dawn being so colossally overbearing in the list building options isn't enough for me to just tank the score down unduly. There's so much other cool range here that honestly I'm gonna settle on like a C. And if Ash and Dawn get brought back into line soon, which I know they very well are not happy with where they're at, at time of recording in late July of 24, I have no idea how they're going to change them. And I certainly am not going to guess. But if those get brought back down into line, more list options open up. This goes to a solid B. There's a lot of gas in the tank, and if you get more options added to the army, it might even be higher. Truly, there is a potential here for this faction to get only cooler and have even more runway for improvement. It's just, we don't have a crystal ball to see the future yet. Working on it. I don't think that's too controversial. I don't think that's too bad.
No, I think what would be controversial if we suggested that maybe they need a trebuchet. That's controversial. That's a controversial take, straight from the Discord itself. So,
no trebuchets, only ballistas. Sorry,
no,
can't do trebuchets.
Can't have that either.
Catapults?
What about just
they're less historically accurate, but could we do catapult?
What about just one huge Ashen Dawn? Just a single Ashen Dawn on a monster base, but just like a really yoked one. But it's actually
like a Mahat, but like ridden by a Jotnar and Ashen Dawn armor.
No. You got it all wrong. It needs to be a giant human on all fours being ridden by a horse.
Oh, we do a flip.
Yeah.
Okay, the Ashen Dawn are actually just weekend at Burning riders on their back, but they're super sentient horse people.
Yes.
Maybe they're just like Centaur with an incredible disguise check.
Wonderful.
That's why they have all the armor.
What a way for us to end this wonderful video we've made for people. Anyways, if you
that's the secret sauce.
If you have any ideas for what you think 100 Kingdoms should get in the future, if you think that we're completely wrong and you want to enlighten us about the things that we don't know, or
except the Centaur, we're right there. We're right about that.
Or if you just really want to talk about it, or if you just want to ask questions, just hit us up on comments below, or send us messages on Instagram, send us messages on Twitter, send us messages on Facebook. I guess we have a Facebook now. Just anywhere, and like, subscribe. Keep watching, share with your friends, whole 9 yards. We're not really good at pitching this to y'all. We just kind of hope you like us talking about cool plastic army men.
And centaurs. But for now, that has been all of our opinions, bona fide and a little too Kentucky Fried. See y'all in the next one.